We have now reached the point in the installation where we're going to have to cut some boards. And this particular board, it looks like we're going to be cutting something out of the middle of it. In some instances, like this one here, it'll be much easier to actually click the board together so it is held into place exactly where you're going to install it. Leaving it 3/8 of an inch off of the board for your expansion will allow you to do a measurement back in to find out how deep a cut you're going to make. So I need 1 3/8 in my depth. We'll mark that on here. And it's 1 3/8 here as well, so we will mark that on here. Now the other measurement we're going to have to do is along the sides of the pillar. Once again, we're going to have to mark it so that there's going to be a 3/8 of an inch expansion on this side of the pillar, as well as a 3/8 of an inch expansion on the other side of the pillar. Now that we have our lines on there, it'll be very important to draw them clearly so that when we cut it with our jigsaw, we will be able to see where the lines are. We've now finished completing the cut around the outside of the post, and we can now install the plank. So as with the other planks, we're going to lift it up on the correct angle, rotate it, give it a couple of pushes, and it'll be locked in. The scrap piece of flooring that we've been using will still be used in order to line the two planks up, and now it's time to tap them into place. Now the plank's been installed, and once again it is now time to measure and cut the end piece. We're about to finish the second row of flooring right now, and it's now time to put the last piece in. We're going to lift it as we did before, rocking it into place. Once the piece is installed, we now have to close up this joint by tapping the end. As you can see, we won't be able to use the tapping block in order to install it, so we're going to have to go back to our installation kit and use our last board puller. The last board puller has a hook on the end which will engage on the end of the flooring and allow us to close the gap up. Also, let's not forget our scrap piece of flooring in order to keep the two boards level. With a couple of light taps, you can now see that the gap has closed up. We remove the last board puller and we install our shims, which will keep the board in place.
Saw off the tongue of the first plank, both on the short as well as the long edges. Orient the first plank in the left corner of the room. Maintain a spacing of 3/8 of an inch using wedges to allow for the expansion gap and a correct fit in the corner. Lay the planks with the tongue side facing the wall in order to use the tongue groove system. Ensure that the planks of the first row are straight. The cut piece from the first row becomes the starting piece for the second row. It should be a minimum of 8 inches or 20 centimeters. Install the cut edge facing the wall with the expansion wedge in place. Angle the piece and click it into the first plank of the first row. Continue the second row with a full piece, placing the tongue into the groove. Move the plank until the end joints are a short distance apart. Click the planks lengthwise into place. For the short edge, use a number of smaller taps until the planks click into place completely. There should be 3/8 of an inch or 10 millimeters expansion joint between the final row and the wall. Place the planks one by one next to the planks of the second to last row. Tap the edges together using the last board puller and hammer.
Now that the floor is completely installed, it is now time to cover the perimeter of the room with moldings. At the doorway right here, you can see that this floor is at a higher level than the existing floor, so we need a transition molding to bring us from this level down to the existing floor level. For this reason, we have chosen a transition molding. The transition molding will be used to cover up the edge of the floor as well as still leave an expansion gap around the perimeter of the room. The two systems for installing it are, you can use the track system, which when installed will still leave an expansion gap around the perimeter of the room. Once this is nailed down into place, you will snap the trim down and it'll be held firmly into place. Another way of installing it is simply by adding an adhesive to the outside of the floor, and once installed you will still leave an expansion gap around the perimeter, but as you can see, it will trim the edge of the floor very, very nicely and give you a finished look. The best location for this molding around the perimeter is exactly right underneath the door, so when the door is closed you don't see the molding in the outside room nor in the room that you are installing the floor in.
Use transition moldings in the doorways. The transition moldings help cover the edges of the floor and give the space necessary for the expansion gap. Remove all spacer blocks and install baseboards and/or quarter rounds. Never attach the baseboard to the floor itself. If a vapor barrier has been used, attach the baseboard through the plastic membrane sticking up from the floor using finishing nails. A floating floor needs an expansion gap around the perimeter of the room. If you choose not to remove your baseboard, use a quarter round to cover the expansion gap. If you choose to remove your baseboard, it will itself cover the gap after it is reinstalled.